In this video, I want to show you how to debug GWT application with a multi-module Maven project configuration and use Super Dev mode to debug it. So let's get started. So first of all, I need a project to get going. So let's go File, New, and then we're going to choose Maven. So this is my favorite way of getting Maven. So I'm going to do Maven project. And so I'm going to use the default locations, hit next. Okay, so I don't have the archetype in my list because I want to add it from a website. So I'm going to go add archetype. So let's go get that Maven project or Maven archetype configurations. And what I'm going to use is Thomas Breuer's GWT Maven archetypes, and he has an excellent multi-module or modular web app. You can choose from a couple different flavors here. So first of all, I'm going to copy the repository URL, go back to Eclipse and add that repository URL. Okay, so I need the group ID, so the group ID, paste that in. Artifact ID, okay, so artifact, I want the modular web app, so I'm going to choose or paste in modular web app, and I'm going to go with version, so he has 1.0 snapshot. Okay, so I got all the settings here. So next, it will select, gotta include snapshot repositories. And so let's just make sure, let's copy his group ID and filter it. And here we go. So we'll select next, and now I need to give it my group ID, and I'm gonna call it my sandbox. You know, you could use a package name for group ID because you can see the package name gets replicated, but I'm going to name it my sandbox to keep the settings simple a lot of times. So we'll just name, I'll use my favorite domain name or one of my favorite, com.gunvertical.sandbox. So that's my package name, and the module is going to be app, and module short name is the app to lowercase. So I'm not going to change that because I like using the defaults, especially for tutorials. So finish. Now the application or archetype has generated into the project workspace. Okay, so now that we have generated a project, let's just review the contents of the project. So here we have the parent, which has the 3 folders or 3 modules. So we have client, and the client source code is going to be the GWT client code. And so here we have a simple RPC request, it looks like, that generates, and that is going to request from the server side. But before that, I see this descriptor. I'm going to get rid of that by going to the Java perspective. So now we're in Java perspective. I got to reopen or expand. So we were in the Java or the server, and here's the server side for the RPC request. And now this defines the servlet that will be listening to the RPC calls from the client. And if we look back at the client, we have the RPC definition or request set up in here. But let's go back. So this is the server side. This is where the server class path will be configured as well in the POM. And then in the shared, let's see what's in the shared code. We have the field verifier, and we have the greeting response, and the RPC construction or interface configuration for the client and server. So let's go back and look at the POM on the client side. We will have, let's go to the POM XML and minify the bottom. And so if we look, we have the dependencies and simply one GWT plugin. And if you look, the GWT packaging is a GWT app, and that takes care of the WAR contents or configuration that Maven does with the WAR. And then let's look at the server side. You can consider the POM. Let me go back to the client real quick. The POM is the directions for the class path setup. So if you look at the class path, in which we can call that Maven dependencies, or if we right click on the project, for instance, right click and we go properties, we can look at the Java build path, and we have, oh, that's missing, so we can remove that if we want. So if we go to source, we don't need this yet because we don't have test cases. And so projects, libraries, we have the Maven dependencies. Same thing over here. In each module will show the class path. Now the unique thing about the modular web app is both the client class path and the server class path are different. Now this is the best, one of the best features about this kind of configuration is both class paths are independent of each other. So you'll find less collisions or conflicts with your server and client side development. Now that's in my opinion. You may have a different perspective on how you want to build your Maven dependencies and or class path configurations for debugging, but most often environments are complex, especially as your application grows and your services that are needed to access other web apps or services throughout the network or cloud. It gets more complicated. So it's really nice to have a separated class path configuration for both client and server. And we'll talk about some more of those subjects as we go into debugging. Okay, so now just for a quick review, we have Maven dependencies for client, Maven dependencies for server, and Maven dependencies for even the shared, which can be used, these types here can be used both on the client and server side, and that's defined in how the dependencies or build configuration is done in the palms, whether the client or the server. Okay, so now that we have the project structure under our hat, let's look at this, how we run this or how we get the server built, because we're not going to be using the embedded Jetty server. What we want is a custom server runtime. So we'll start by configuring our custom server runtime. Let's just look at Eclipse preferences and window preferences on Windows, and we'll go server and runtime environments. Now with Java EE, a lot of these things are downloaded by default. If you're not using Java EE, you're going to have to go out and fetch some WST package or plugins to get this going. So let's add, and I know, well, let's see what server runtime. Let's go back real quick and look at the default server runtime configuration configured in here. And here I see a Jetty, oh, and a Tomcat. So let's use Tomcat to start. Whoops, I made an error in there. So let's return Eclipse preferences, server. We're going to go to server runtime environments. We're going to add, let's add latest Apache Tomcat 9. And so what we need is a Tomcat installation directory. Well, I've already downloaded it. Basically, it's download the zip, extract it into a directory that you remember you can use. And let's go to that directory quickly. So that would be in my brand flake, Eclipse, Tomcat, Apache. And this is a Mac file manager. Of course, Windows file management will be a little bit different. And we'll select finish. Now I have a server runtime that I can just pick from when I go to install it. You don't have to come back here every time to install it. This is only a one-time experience until, or once as Eclipse is installed. So we'll click OK. So now we need to go to the debug perspective, open up debug, and see here we have a servers tab. What we'll do is put it in its own view, or view that we can be seen at all times. It says no servers are available, but we already did Eclipse preferences. Well, that's the predefined servers that we can select from. So let's go servers. Oh, look, it's already expanded to Tomcat. And if we look, server runtimes, we just did this, so we don't have to do it again. So we'll select next. Oh, here's our module. This will be not highlighted if it's not configured or matches up with the server. And these settings that are adjusted here so it will work with the server are considered the facet settings or project facet settings. So by default, in this configuration, it works by default. So I won't cover that in detail right now, but we'll look at coming back to that. So here we go, we're going to add it. Now this module or modules were added because the server is the root module. It has a client and shared. So now that we have it added to the server, what do we do next? We can do a couple things. We can go debug, start, profile. I like to debug. What that means is, let's say I want to do a breakpoint on the server-side classes, and that would allow me to breakpoint, and then those breakpoints are marshaled to the runtime environment, and we see that we can have controls in the debug. So over here we have variables and breakpoints, and you can break and pause and inspect the code on the server runtime. Well, let's start the debug experience. But we installed a GWT app. What does that mean? Do we have to configure GWT? No, it should automatically start if everything is wired up properly. So before we get there, let's just confirm. So here we go, we have a client project. Let's go GWT settings. Oh, it is a GWT project, web application. This is not a war container or war directory because it's just the client side. The server is going to be the server side or war directory, so we don't want this configured. This would be using if you wanted to use the embedded Jetty web server. Okay, so that's correct. So let's look at facet. The quickest way there is to look at, just type in facet and drill that down. Oh, it didn't automatically configure. That means I got to contact the admin of the GWT Eclipse plugin and get that fixed. I don't know why I didn't do it this time. Let's just confirm by going right click on the project. If we go Maven, update project, this should run the Maven configurator again, and maybe it will work. If it doesn't, I gotta fix the bug. So let's go back to client, and we'll go GWT settings. Oh, no, that's not what I want. I want the facet settings, because the facet settings tell me how. Okay, so for some reason, it's also not syncing. So let's go back. Okay, so Maven project configured automatically configured it. So there was a deferment or some kind of reason why they didn't get, but that's good. But so what we want here is this to be selected. Okay, so facet settings, we need this sync the code server on by default. So this should be in a future version on by default when you first configure the project. But let's say you don't want GWT development mode to automatically start up when you start the server, you unselect this. So, alright, so we have GWT facets, the GWT is configured, and GWT settings. Okay, so there we go. And the Palm, it's not saved for some reason. Okay, so let's go back to debug, right click on this and click debug. Alright, so now we have the server starting up. Oh, and look, the GWT development mode code server automatically started. So not only did the Tomcat start, it started the GWT development mode code server. And now you can see that it's compiling. But before I open up the web page for it, let's just see what it created in the debug configurations. So here we have, let's review the server first. We created the server. So this is the server runtime configuration or server launcher configuration. And if we go down, it automatically wired up a launcher called My Sandbox. It just used the module name as the name of the launcher. It wired up GWT code server. And the code server is basically dev mode without the wrapper. So code servers run from dev mode normally, but in this case we're just running the code server piece of it, which is basically the compiler or incremental compiler. So every change you do in the project, you compile it and it compiles into the war directory, a project directory in that war directory. So here we have our module, our launcher directory, which is the war output path. In the case of the server runtime environment, it's hosted in a different location so it doesn't clobber your production compiles. I won't cover that in detail right now, but if you have questions, you can ask me later. So JRE class path, this is the class path configuration. We see that what dev mode is put on. This is done by the IDE and is used for the compiler. Okay, so the other ones aren't important. So now that we're done, let's start a web page. Now it automatically gave me a URL here to click. So what I'm going to do is open up SDBG Chrome JS Debugger, which allows me to breakpoint on the client side. So now if we see that it's loading, it's actually compiling the first permutation. The first permutation will always take a little bit longer than the second. So let's say, let's just test, oh, RPC works to the client or to the server side. So now that we want to make a change, let's go back to our IDE. Now open up the Java for a little bit more room, and so we have our app here. So let's change some text and see if it will change on the client side. So let's say, where's our button? Our button says send. Let's go sending something. Okay, go back to the website here, and then we're going to reload the app. It compiles. Oh, look, the button changed, sending something. Well, let's say we want to click or set a breakpoint on sending something. Let's see what that means. Okay, so we have a click handler. Here's our button. Here's our on click. I want to breakpoint inside that. Let's go back and let's reload the web page. Oh, I didn't need to reload it. I could have just said sending something. Oh, what? It's not. Oh, there it was. It just took a second. Okay, so let's say remember decision. Now we're going to go to the debug perspective, and here's the stack over here with all the frames. And whoop, that's not. Normally I go like this. I'll make it a little bit smaller, and then I take the breakpoints, put them over to the right, and then here's our variable inspection. So we'll click the top of the stack, and now we have our event, and we can inspect this variable. Now you can see super dev mode. You're actually looking at the JavaScript variables, and they have a little bit of a funny name, postfix. But you'll be able to link it up with the code, and you can see the breakpoint is pointed to where I put the breakpoint, and then here's the stack and variables for that location in the breakpoint. Now this is pretty cool because you can actually inspect and look at the behavior inside the code. Well, let's say we want to do a breakpoint on the server side. What does that mean? Because we're using a server-side runtime in this modular configuration. If we look at the server code, which here's the request comes in here, it actually deserializes the input or serializes or whatever. Brain is glitching. So we get the input. Let's break before we send back the response to the client. So let's look at the web app and let's send something. Oh, and there's the server-side breakpoint. Now we can see the same type of thing, but since this is Java and it's not on the client side, we get the same kind of output. And here's the stack. Here's some variables you can inspect with the hover over, and the same thing as a client side, except we're not looking at JavaScript variables. Now that's pretty cool because it's both client and server-side environment all in one. And they're separated. So if we do change something, let's just put a lot more exclamation points. If we save it, and let's just go back to the debug tab because I want to show you the server thing, the server runtime. If you look, it says debugging restart. Now it will say update resources, and you can push them back out to the war directory. Okay, so now let's go and reload the app. Oh, now we got a breakpoint because we clicked on that. We don't need that app breakpoint. So let's just reload it real quick and then hit send. And here's all the exclamation points. We didn't have to restart the web server or we didn't have to start super dev mode or the web server. So that's what's great about this, is you get the best of both worlds, and it's basically two processes running as sort of one. as a parent. So if you look, well, there's 3 processes, I forgot, because the Chrome JS debugger runs as a process, the super dev mode runs as a process, which is the GWT compiler, and you rarely have to restart these once you get up and running. Unless something glitches with your services, you can restart them and continue on. So if we go back to the Java, let's review real quick. We have a multi-module web app with class paths that are configured with different Maven dependencies. And the Maven dependencies are basically the POM gives directions and says, okay, these dependencies are for the client side, these dependencies are for the server side, and this is for the shared. So you can have quite a flexible framework to debug your web applications. And this is not necessarily dependent on any particular server runtime. You could actually use a server that is not run by Eclipse. Let's say you run it off-site or externally. The configuration just gets different. And I won't talk about those configurations in this video, but you can basically do any configuration you want with this type of framework, which means you could use GWT code server for, well, I might as well cover this real brief. You can use the GWT development code server, best used for server runtimes that are run in Eclipse. And if they're locally hosted, you can use them GWT code server. Now, if you have a fancier setup and you have an external web server, that's where you want to use the GWT compiler. Now, I've shared some of those configurations online, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go search that and see if you don't find it, or ask me offline. But what the GWT compiler will allow you to do is basically do the same incremental compile and output to any directory anywhere. So if you're running an SSL web server, if you're running a web server that's remote in some other IP, that method is going to be for you, because you can't run SSL with just basically super dev mode because of the way the super dev mode gets wired up and bootstrapped. But you're not limited to that. You got the GWT compiler, and all you have to do is set the incremental compile flag and compile directory, war directory, and away you go. Okay, so you could go, of course, I didn't talk about GWT classic dev mode or basically dev mode that's got the legacy connection protocol to the web browser, such as IE and Firefox 26. I don't recommend using those, but those are available. What I suggest is try to take some time and try the new GWT super development mode, because I think you'll find that it'll change your world once you get up and running, especially if you want to debug in the browser. So that's something I forgot to review. So if we want to turn on the dev tools, I've mentioned this in the other videos, this will turn off the browser breakpoints if you're using super development mode. Well, why won't dev tools open automatically? Keys are not, my fingers are not key happy. Okay, so now we have the development mode open. Now let's just put it into the sticky side here. So we have both. Okay, so now that we have this open, we can't set breakpoints, or let's just review that real quick. So let's say we want to set, we can do this. We can go debugger, and we set that. Okay, so now we have a breakpoint. We can force a breakpoint in this handler. So if we go and reload the application, oh, there's the breakpoint. You know, I had the wrong button. I thought I was doing the sending button, sending something, but I was actually the close button. Oh, what you do when you're recording a video. Okay, so if we open it up, we can see that the debugger breakpoint, basically we forced a breakpoint here, and we can see the stack and variable inspection just like we were doing in the IDE. Now, I won't cover the rest or other types of configurations in this video. We'll look at different videos in the future to cover different configurations. Thanks for listening today, and I look forward to having you back on another video.